Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Emma Maynard, and I am the Assistant Director in Alumni Relations, overseeing career and network programming. Today's webinar is brought to you by the JMU Alumni Association. We're excited to bring you this alumni webinar program with the goal of providing career-related resources that help you conveniently cultivate your professional self. We have a wonderful representation of our alumni joining us today, and I want to say thank you for participating. Before I introduce today's speaker, just some brief housekeeping notes. If you're participating live, a reminder that your microphones are muted for the presentation. You do have two chat options. We will have a Q&A at the end of our presentation, so as you have questions of the presenter, please choose the Q&A option and send your questions directly to me, the host, and we will share those at the end of the webinar. You can also feel free to comment and share your thoughts with your fellow participants today during the presentation using the chat option and selecting all participants. We'd also love to see you live tweet during the webinar using hashtag JMUAAwebinar. As a reminder, the webinar will be recorded and accessible on our website in our Career and Networking section. As a token, though, of appreciation for our Dukes engaging with us live today, you will be entered into a drawing to receive a special prize courtesy of the JMU Alumni Association. Now it's my pleasure to introduce alumna Laura Taylor and our presenter for today. After finishing college at JMU, Laura moved to New York, where she pursued a career in assistive technology. She soon realized the 9-to-5 grind was not for her. It was around this time she was presented with the opportunity to access mentorship from a successful husband and wife business team. By applying the life coaching they provided, she was able to not only change the course of her professional track, but also enhance many other areas of her life, such as finances, relationships, and health. She walked away from the corporate route at 26 years old and has been a full-time entrepreneur in the business development area ever since. Today, she resides in Harrisonburg, Virginia, with her husband and 3 small children. Laura and her husband continue to mentor others in the areas of life skills, leadership, team building, and business development. They have spoken both around the country and internationally, and today we have Laura speaking on mentoring made easy as pie, setting one more seat at your table this Thanksgiving. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to Laura.
Thank you, Emma. I appreciate the introduction here, and I did want to say thank you so much to the JMU Alumni Association for this honor. I certainly enjoyed my time at JMU, and so any opportunity to be involved in JMU as an alum is definitely an honor. And welcome everyone who's on this webinar. It is my sincere goal that through this webinar, I can pass along some bits of wisdom, some experience that might, take root in your life and kind of pass that on and send that a ripple effect forward. So with that, I would love to dive into the webinar here. Again, mentoring made easy as pie, setting one more seat at your table this Thanksgiving. And before I dive into everything, I do want to introduce myself, just an extension of Emma's introduction. So you have a visual here of who you're hearing from. This is me, my husband, and my 3 small children. We have Christian, who is 6, kindergarten this year, Parker, who is 5 in preschool, and Madison, who just turned 3. And, I introduce my family as well because it's really a backbone in terms of what we do. I've received mentorship and I've learned to be that mentee, and now my husband and I both feel that it's, one of our greatest responsibilities to pass that along in the lives of our children. And so it's, for all of you parents out there or soon-to-be parents or future parents, it's an honor and a great responsibility to do that. But a little bit more about my background. Emma did mention I'm from New York originally, and it's an interesting story how I wound up coming down to JMU. I remember applying for college, and for all of you JMU alum, I'm sure you remember that time pretty well. applying for different schools, wondering where you were going to go. Maybe some of you knew that JMU was the school for you. In fact, I had heard of JMU, but it actually wasn't on my radar in terms of where I was going to apply. But my guidance counselor sat me down and he said, Laura, because I was in New York about 6 hours from Harrisonburg, and he said, my daughter went to this school called James Madison University. I think that you would absolutely love it, and I recommend that you apply, and if you get in, at least go take a look, because I really think that this is the school for you. And so it's kind of interesting, because even before I wound up coming to JMU and starting my career at JMU, it was based upon, you know, the guidance and somewhat the mentorship of someone in my life that even brought me here. And so I wound up coming down to JMU. I studied psychology and human services from the years of 99 to 03. And, you know, it's interesting, maybe some of you can relate to this. I started my career at JMU, and I wound up taking a couple different classes. And I think over the course of my 4.5 years at school, I wound up changing my major like 4 or 5 times. I find that there are those people who they come in and they know exactly the course they're going to take, and I was not that person. I would take a class and I would say, wow, well, there's aspects of this program that I really like, but I don't know if I can see myself doing this for the next 40 years. So I would change to something else and I would dabble in that. And because I wound up changing my major so many times, it took me an extra semester to graduate. And I remember thinking, you know, it's all about your perspective, and your perspective is certainly your reality. And I remember thinking, as you know, that May was wrapping up and all of my roommates and all of my friends were graduating, and it only took me an extra semester, but like at that moment in my life, I remember thinking, this is kind of the end of the world. You know, like I kind of feel like a loser. Everyone else is graduating and I'm still here this extra semester. And so one thing that I did learn is that in every adversity, there is a seed of equal or greater benefit if you can keep a positive mental attitude. And in that extra semester, that is actually where, when I met my husband, he is from the Harrisonburg area, it is when I was presented with an opportunity to engage in a mentor-mentee relationship. And so oftentimes I feel like, you know, that darkest hour is just before the dawn, and that definitely held true for me. And so that's a little bit about, you know, about me and about my background. And it's going to jump into the next slide on how I started to be mentored. You know, as I was graduating and finishing up my career at JMU, I realized that there were a lot of areas in my life that were kind of a mess. And one thing I started to realize is that how I did one thing was how I did everything. And I relate that to the ice cube tray principle, meaning this: for me personally, if I was unorganized or just undisciplined in one area, that would eventually spill over into the next area and spill over into the next area. And it was like every area of my life was all connected. And it wasn't like I could be put together in one area of my life and then be totally a mess in the other, because eventually it all caught up. And that's really at the culmination of my college career, that's kind of how I felt. I wound up accumulating a lot of consumer debt because I had no financial discipline whatsoever. I was kind of all over the place health-wise, battling with a couple different things. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had no really like finite direction career-wise. And so I remember when the opportunity to be mentored by this particular couple, when that opportunity came into my life, I said, these are people that they're not necessarily perfect, but they have components of their life that if I look at my life 10, 20 years from now, I would like my life to be like this. I would like my marriage to kind of look like this. I would like my finances to look like this. I would like to be passionate in a career path like they are. And so I felt like I was pretty open to that. And that's one thing that I would urge you to do, is to be open to different spheres of mentorship. And that's really how I started. It wound up coming kind of out of a mess, knowing that because I had some financial undiscipline and I was kind of chaotic in where my career was going to go, that I was open to that mentorship. And one of the things that what a mentor provided for me, especially right off the bat, was a different perspective. So a little bit about my husband, because he, you know, we are business partners, and truthfully, he's one of the greatest mentors in my life. But one of the things that a mentor certainly provides is a different perspective. My husband, he is a Virginia Tech alum, and he played football down, so he is a Hokie, and he played football down there at Virginia Tech. Graduated in 2002, so he had a really winning class. They wound up playing in the national championship, and he just learned so much from playing football at a collegiate level. And, you know, he always talks about how in his coaches, just specifically with football, he said, you know, they would coach from different perspectives. So you'd have your sideline coach, and then you'd have what he calls your eye in the sky. And that's kind of what these pictures represent here, that there were coaches that they had a different perspective. The coaches that were sitting in the box had a way different perspective than the coaches who were on the sideline. And that's just in terms of mentorship in my life, that is one of the biggest assets, is that oftentimes when you have a mentor that you allow to speak into your life, they can speak into your life from a different perspective. They have a different perch of experience, or, you know, and one thing that I learned is that you can either learn from your own experience or you can learn from mentorship. And that experience is only the best teacher when it's not your experience. Because when it's your experience, typically it costs you time and money. And if you can avoid those things and you just accept that mentorship and you have that ability to listen and that ability to receive that different perspective, that, you know, it can set you forward so much in the area of life. So another thing that mentor provided for me was guidance on uncharted territories. You know, I want to read a couple stats here because I felt like they were super interesting. So according to Sports Illustrated, there was an article that I read, and it had to do with athletes after they retire, and, you know, whether that be the NBA, the NFL, or Major League Baseball. And here's basically what the article said. It said that athletes from the nation's 3 biggest and most profitable leagues, the NBA, NFL, and Major League Baseball, are suffering from a financial pandemic. Although salaries have risen steadily during the last 3 decades, reports from a host of sources like athletes, players associations, agents, financial advisors, et cetera, they indicate that by the time they've been retired for 2 years, 78% of former NFL players have gone bankrupt or are under financial stress because of joblessness or divorce. That within 5 years of retirement, an estimated 60% of former NBA players are completely broke. They also, Sports Illustrated also said that it has been recently estimated that 80% of retired NFL players go broke in their first 3 years out of the league. And they said, how is this possible in a sport rolling in revenue with an average salary of almost $2 million a year? And so I know for, like, you know, if you're in college right now or you're a fairly recent grad, you're like, if I had a $2 million a year income, you know, I can't see that I would be broke after a couple of years. But the number one reason that Sports Illustrated cites is lack of competent financial planning advice, that athletes are no different than any other college grad, and that they're not trained as undergrads in budgeting, in the tax system, long-term financial planning, that this is an area of specialized expertise, and an athlete receiving large compensation needs a safety net of advisors or, you know, some sort of financial mentorship. And I can say that was so absolutely true in my life. I mentioned previously, I came out of school, you know, I was fortunate enough, like many other students, but many students are not fortunate enough to come out of school. Many students have just gobs and gobs of student loans. I was fortunate enough to have parents who did help cushion that burden of student loans. However, because I was so financially undisciplined in college, I wound up graduating with over $12,000 of credit card debt. It was out of total financial undiscipline. Basically, if I wanted it, I charged it. You know, I got one of those great credit cards in the Commons of JMU my freshman year where they hand you out a free T-shirt and they're like, hey, sign up for this credit card and increase your credit. And me, I just didn't know how to handle that properly. And so one of the greatest things that mentorship, especially in the area of finances, has helped me in is it taught me to live below my means. I remember hearing my mentor say, nothing is leaving this earth. There is nothing so important that you need to charge it or you need to buy it that will put you in financial distress. And to learn, that that you can live without maybe a brand new car, but instead maybe buy a used car. And maybe you don't need that extra pair of shoes that you feel like will fulfill you on some sort of emotional level, but that you can delay that gratification, and in the long term, you'll be way better off. They also taught me just some basic principles like try not to take on any debt unless that debt is making you some sort of money. And so, it is a financial success story that I was able to pay off that credit card debt fairly quickly, and that, to this day, my husband and I, we do live debt-free outside of our mortgage, so we do have our mortgage as a debt, but outside of that, cars paid off, credit cards paid off, money in the bank, because you just live at, I feel like, a much more peaceful level when you can operate like that. And we meet students now, and we like to pass on some of that financial mentorship that we received, because we'll meet students who, they graduate with a 4-year degree. I met a girl fairly recently who graduated with a 4-year degree in history, and because she was out of state, I believe her monthly student loan payment was somewhere between $900 and $1,000 a month, and she could only find a part-time job that had to do with her major. So, that's one of our hot buttons, is to pass along the mentorship, especially in this area of finances. So, on to the next slide here. Another thing that a mentor provides is belief. I want to pose this question to you all. Can you remember somebody in your life? Maybe it was younger if you were in athletics, or maybe it was a teacher, or maybe it's, currently a boss, or maybe it is a mentor, somebody that's in your life, but someone that you will perform at a higher level for, somebody that always tends to pull out the best in you, somebody that there is everything inside of you that you do not want to let down, because that's the type of person that I believe is the best mentor for you. And that's what I believe when we want to mentor others, that's what we have to provide for other people. And I believe one of the biggest things a mentor can provide is belief. When I was in high school, I was a pretty good student, and I still remember in 10th grade, I had this math teacher, and his name was Mr. Feely. We took our first exam, and it's crazy how when someone can pull out the best in you and when they believe in you, you can remember down to the detail how that happens. Well, I remember taking this first exam in math and 10th grade, and I was a good student, but I had kind of gotten pretty lackadaisical. I knew I could do just enough to get a good grade, and I didn't really go that extra mile. Well, I remember being in his math class, taking that exam, and I got it back, and I did not get a very good grade. Well, what he did was he offered the opportunity for anyone who didn't like their grade, they could retake their test. So I stayed after school that day, and I decided I was going to retake the test. I retook the test, and I still remember to this day bringing up the sheet of paper with the math problems on it, and I put it on his desk, and he said, "Hold on a minute, Laura." And he looked through it, and he said, he circled number 2, and he circled number 10, and he said, "Look at these 2 problems again. Redo those and then come back to me." And I remember I came back to him, and he put a big check mark on number 2, but he said, "Look at number 10 again." And so I went back to my seat, and I redid the problem, and I came back again, and then he slapped a big fat 100 A+ on the top of the paper. And I just remember, and I don't totally know why, but I just remember the fact that he did not project that perfectionism on me, that he allowed me to mess up and try again. I still remember that had such an impact on me that I wound up forging just a really good mentorship style relationship with him. And because he had that belief in me, that he knew that I could get it right. He knew that I could do it. He saw smartness in me that maybe I didn't see at that moment in my life. As a 10th grade girl, you're trying to figure a lot of stuff out. But he poured that belief into me until I could believe in myself enough. And I had him 2 years in a row in math, and I never got below 100% on any exam that he did ever again. Because I never wanted to let him down. I knew that he believed in me so much that he would give me that extra chance, but I said, you gave me that extra chance once and you're not going to have to do it again. And to this day, he's, for many different reasons, but one of my most impactful teachers, and I still remember that. And just what that power of belief did for me. And I believe that every single one of us, we can remember somebody who believed in us, that it fueled us, and it took the pressure off, and it made us be the best version of ourselves that we could possibly be. And that's what I believe a good mentor provides. So here's a fun little story. So another thing a mentor provides, they tell you not necessarily what you need to, not necessarily what you want to hear, but they tell you what you need to hear. And this is a picture here. I'm sure you recognize him. He's a famous comedian, Kevin Hart. And a little bit about his story and how it relates to mentorship. He said, after years of struggling as a comedian, he credits the launch of his success to Keith Robinson, a veteran comedian who saw him perform one night at a local club. Keith took Kevin under his wing, but not before giving him a stern lecture about finding his authentic voice. So a little bit of backstory here on Kevin Hart. He was raised by his mother. He has a brother, and his mom was, for all intents and purposes, a single mom. His dad was in and out of jail. He had a drug problem, so a lot fell on his mom's shoulders, and they didn't necessarily have the easiest upbringing. And so Kevin said that he found comedy to really be like a coping mechanism. And he kind of had a rough start. He said he pounded the pavement at a variety of small clubs, and he worked under a stage name. And he said that his quote is, "I was trying to be everybody. I was so confused, I didn't know what to do." And so apparently he would go from comedy club to comedy club, and he didn't really have a ton of people that would come out to see him. He didn't really have a big following, and not many people found him funny. But one day, Keith Robinson saw him, and he saw something in Kevin that was greater than what Kevin was giving in terms of, like, comedic performance. So under his guidance, he said that he began to mentor him, and he basically got him unstuck. And success eventually followed. And so this year, just, a quick snapshot of success, Kevin actually dethroned Jerry Seinfeld as the most successful comedian of all time, bringing in hundreds of millions of dollars. But he always says that, it took him over 15 years to be an overnight success. But one of the things that he attributes to his success is the fact that he had a mentor in his life who was willing to tell him what he needed to hear and not what he wanted to hear. And it got him unstuck, because sometimes I think in life we're going through those motions and we can be stuck. It's like we're a car or a truck out in the middle of the field and we're spinning tires. And it's just like we are stuck in the mud, and you need someone else to pull you out to gain some traction. And that's what Keith was for Kevin. He gave him a different perspective. He was someone that was in his field. He was someone that he respected, someone that he trusted, and he allowed for that correction. And so as I go to the next slide, that kind of filters into the next slide, is that another lesson learned through mentorship is you've got to have the ability to accept correction. The photo here is, if any of you are fans of Shark Tank, my husband, we like to watch Shark Tank, and one of the investors on Shark Tank is a gentleman by the name of Robert Herjavec. And he says, he attributes, really it was like one moment in time and one acceptance of correction through mentorship that absolutely changed the course, really, of his life. He, at the time, was working with Warren Avis, who was the founder of Avis Rent-A-Car, and he said, Robert Herjavec said that Warren Avis was the first person to tell me that the way I was doing things was way off base. And he said it was a lesson that he never forgot. He said, at the time, he took me to the window of our office and asked me to look at the hot dog vendor selling at the edge of our parking lot. He told me that I was acting like the vendor, pushing products and doing all the work to make a living. He followed that statement with, you need to be the guy supplying the dogs to all the vendors if you ever want to scale. At the time, his words took me by surprise because I was so focused and determined to succeed. Robert said, he said, but I realized I had the wrong approach. And that day was a turning point in my professional career. I realized I couldn't do it alone. I needed to leverage the resources around me and dedicate myself to an opportunity that had the potential to scale. Had it not been Mr. Avis taking the time to help me realize the true opportunity in front of me, I don't think I would have ever fully grasped my potential as an entrepreneur. And so I say that because in terms of, you know, mentorship in my life, that has been one area. It's not always fun to accept correction. Oftentimes, and I'm just speaking from a personal level here, oftentimes I believe we can get a bit defensive when somebody wants to correct us. But then I always just think, pride come before the fall, so be open to correction. And you know, one of the things, oftentimes if we have a very easily offendable heart, it can be hard to accept correction because we're always on that defensive. So a couple of questions I do want to pose to you to see, you know, are you open to that correction in your life? Because that's the only, nothing grows in your comfort zone. It's, you know, those times when something is a bit uncomfortable, it's those times when, you know, what we tolerate, we will not change. So when things become a bit intolerable and then we're open to that correction, that's when I believe that we can make those giant leaps forward. But just a couple questions to maybe pose to yourself to see if you are easily offendable. Do you frequently take things the wrong way? Do you feel like people are constantly saying or doing things to ruffle your feathers? Do others feel like they have to walk on eggshells around you? Do others say that you make mountains out of molehills? And so sometimes I believe, you know, I've heard the quote before, if we know ourselves, we know the world. So sometimes I think it's good to take a moment and be a bit introspective and ask ourselves some of these questions because we all have blind spots. We all have spots that are weaknesses that we can't necessarily see, and I believe that's what a good mentor can do. A good mentor can shine those lights on our blind spots so we know our weaknesses and we can make them stronger. Just personally, here are some lessons that I learned through mentorship, and these were, you know, when I was 23 years old, graduating from college, these are some areas that I needed to improve on if I ever wanted to achieve, I believe, success in every area of my life. I learned that emotional stability and maturity give us power. That blame, justification, and entitlement render you powerless. That you set an example of responsibility, generosity, and gratitude within your sphere of influence. I remember hearing this story, and it's probably a fictional story, but if, you know, for the sake of the example, I'll go ahead and tell it. I heard a story of that there were these twin ladies, and they grew up in poverty, and they grew up in the foster care system, and they were always together. And they didn't have an easy life, and they often lived in crime-ridden areas. And one of the twin sisters, she grew up and she was incarcerated for, you know, she wound up pursuing a life of drugs and crime and, you know, eventually wound up in jail. And the other sister, she wound up paying her way through school. She became a successful doctor and a very successful contributor to her community. And when both women were interviewed, you know, later in life, the interview said, what do you attribute to where you are in life? And the sister who was incarcerated, she said, I attribute to where I am in life based upon my upbringing. It's the reason I am the way I am because that's all I knew. And then the other sister, when they asked her the same question, you know, what do you attribute to where you are in life? And the sister who was successful and a doctor, she said, I attribute my upbringing. It's the reason I am the way I am. It's everything I knew I didn't want to be. And so I tell that story because I believe life just in general typically isn't easy. And you can take a situation, but when you cast blame and when you make justifications for maybe why something didn't work out the way it was supposed to work out, and or you start to feel entitled, I believe that sucks the power from you. However, when you take personal responsibility and maybe something isn't the way in life that you want it to be, but you use that as the reason to change your circumstances and to change in the future, I believe that gives us all the power in the world. I remember hearing this from my mentor as I was beginning my first career. My first career, as I was coming out of James Madison University, I worked as an assistive technologist up in the northern New Jersey area. I worked for, it was a special education school district, and essentially what I would do is I would hop around from school to school. I did adaptive technology, and sometimes I would teach a computer class. So my role kind of changed, varied upon what school I was in. And I remember, so there was a lot of time management skills, and there was a lot of juggling of schedules because I would go from one school that might be 30 minutes from another school. The district was fairly large. And I remember coming to this school and getting scolded by a teacher. And I was probably brand new. It was like 2 months into work. And the teacher said, "You were supposed to be here last Wednesday at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and I had you scheduled for my class, and you were not here." And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, she's probably right, and I didn't put it in my schedule. Well, immediately, my first response was I wanted to think of an excuse, like why I wasn't there. And I wanted to cast blame. You know, the things coming to my mind were like, I'm so sorry, I, got into a fender bender, or, some kind of excuse. But the words of my mentor rang in my head, that blame, justification, and entitlement render you powerless. And you know what the truth was? The truth was I was bad with my time management, and I did not factor that into my calendar. And because of a mistake that I made, it rippled over into her having a delay in figuring out something to do in her classroom when she expected me to be there. And I remember taking personal responsibility and saying, you're right, and I'm really sorry. That is totally my fault. And I was not good with my time management, and I was not organized with my schedule. And I just remember putting that on myself, and it didn't feel great. But I'm telling you, when I did that, her entire demeanor changed. She looked at me and she was like, it's okay. We all make mistakes. It's not a big deal. And I appreciate you being honest. And so I say that because that was an area that I personally needed to improve on. I needed to learn to not take things so personally. I needed to learn not to cast blame and try to justify the reason why I did something wrong, but take that personal responsibility, because we can all control our attitudes and our actions. Someone can make us feel a certain way, but we can control how we react to the way that they make us feel. So on to the next slide. I also learned to make decisions in peaks and not in valleys. Because when you're you think about that, if you're on the mountaintop, you have a lot of clarity and you can see really far. But if you're in the valley, oftentimes your perspective is very limited. And a great leadership author is a gentleman by the name of John Maxwell, and he said, most of the time our decisions are based on our emotional environment rather than our reality. When we're in the valleys of life, we don't see clearly. Our perspective is limited, and all we see are the problems around us. In the valleys, we make decisions not to better ourselves, but to escape our problems. And so that was something else that I learned, that when I felt like I was at emotional low, that is not the best time to make a good decision. The best time to make a lifelong decision is when we're on the peaks and when we have clear vision. And then, the next slide, how to choose the right mentor. One of the questions you might want to ask yourself when you're looking to dive into a mentorship relationship is, does this person have what I want in all areas of life? Do they have that 360 degrees of success? Because they might be super successful in the financial realm, but maybe you would never want their marriage, or you would never want the relationship that they have with their children, or the relationship that they have with their parents, or the relationship that they have with their employees or their colleagues. And so one thing that I've learned is to always be very cautious in terms of who you accept advice from and who you accept input from, because would you want what they have in those areas of life? And that you attract what you are and not what you want. And which leads me to that photo here of Eminem and Dr. Dre. Eminem, when I was coming through JMU, rapper superstar, but, you know, a little bit of his story was he was like super down and out. And in 1997, he wound up going out to LA to compete in the Rap Olympics, which is a nationwide battle rap competition. He placed second, but Interscope Records was there, and one of the staff members sent a copy of his Slim Shady EP to the company's CEO, Jimmy Iovine. And so Jimmy hears this audio, and he's like, you know, this guy's pretty talented, but like my go-to guy for this area of music is Dr. Dre. And Dr. Dre said he recalls the first time he wound up hearing that audio, and he said, in my entire career in the music industry, I've never found anything from a demo tape or a CD. But when Jimmy played this, when he played Eminem's track, he said, find him now. And I just say that because, you know, I believe that success is when opportunity and preparedness meet. And, you know, oftentimes when we're out there, you know, we attract what we are, not what we want. And, you know, Eminem was out there and he was doing the thing, and he was putting himself out there, which gave him the opportunity and the preparedness to be connected with the right mentor. And so I believe, you know, if we constantly put ourselves in scenarios that might be somewhat uncomfortable, but they stretch us, and they put us in scenarios where we can brush shoulders with people who are further in life than we are, that gives you the opportunity to possibly be linked up with a successful mentor that can, you know, potentially change the course of your career. So now kind of wrapping things up here, mentoring made easy, setting one more seat at your table this Thanksgiving, really what that mentor-mentee relationship looks like. The role of the mentor, here's some bullet points that I believe is the mentor's role. So if you're a mentor to someone, you know, this is what I believe your responsibility is, that true success will produce a successor. You know, the mentor transfers wisdom through relationship. There's that trust factor. The mentor is more interested in the mentee's success than his or her affection. I love, you know, my husband, he is a great mentor to a lot of other men, and that's one of the things I respect so much about my husband, is the fact that he has such honesty and boldness, and he knows, and that's one of the traits I admire about him most, is the fact that when he's in that mentor relationship, he is way more interested in somebody's success than often their feelings. And a lot of times, you know, one thing that I have noticed is if you're being mentored and you can often, you know, you get very easily offended from that correction or that mentorship, a lot of times that mentor will put you back in the friend zone, and you're no longer in that mentee zone because they just don't think you can take it. Another role of the mentor is not necessarily the mentee's best friend. And the mentor sees weaknesses in the mentee before he or she experiences the pain of them. And, you know, I think that that's really important. There's that trust factor. And, you know, I remember one time, this was early on in my marriage, and my husband and I, we were newlyweds, and we were starting, I was just about finishing, you know, my last like corporate career, so to speak, and we started to do some business development and really to harness our skills as entrepreneurs. And our mentors, they gave us some advice. I remember, and this might sound super silly, but the advice was, you guys have no distractions right now. You don't have children. You don't own a home. We were renting a small apartment. We were living way below our means. And their advice to us was, don't get a dog. Because we were like, we really want a dog. And they're like, you guys are doing so much traveling. Just don't get a dog. Well, we went against our mentor's advice. And I remember we got a dog. Well, and this is kind of a crazy example, but we wound up getting this dog. And the apartment that we lived in at the time, when they found out the breed of the dog, they said, that is one of the breeds that is not allowed in this apartment complex, so you either have to get rid of the dog or you have to move. Well, we decided we're not getting rid of this dog. We love this dog, so we wound up moving. Well, instead of renting another apartment, we decided let's just buy a house. So we wound up buying a house. Well, when we bought the house, we wound up having to put a fence in the house for the dog. And now we lived in a house that had way more square footage than our original apartment, so we wound up having to buy furniture and curtains and area rugs and all of these things. And I remember it wound up being somewhat of a distraction at that period of our life. And I always say that dog, that when we went against our mentor's advice, wound up costing us into the six figures. Kind of joking, but kind of not, because we wound up purchasing this home. It was like the height of the real estate bubble that we didn't know. And you know, but it's just kind of a crazy real life example that that mentor, you know, they didn't want us to experience maybe the pain of something that they had experienced, and they were trying to give us some advice and we didn't take it. And so us not listening to them definitely cost us some time and money, but we learned from it and we became a little bit wiser. And then on this next slide here is a picture of, you know, we have a couple different mentors in our life, but this is one of our mentors here, and it's actually my husband's parents, my in-laws, and, you know, they're some of the greatest mentors in our life, and in my opinion, these are some of the roles that the mentee, this is when my husband and I, we mentor with my in-laws, with his parents. These are some of the things that we bring to the table. And I think about this quote by Sir Isaac Newton, that if I have seen farther than others, it's because I have stood on the shoulders of giants. And that's what I believe a mentorship relation does. You know, it's the mentees, it's our responsibility to pursue them because they have what we want. We don't have what they want. It's a mentee. A mentee is an obedient learner and follows the counsel of the mentor. A mentee opens up and reveals goals and dreams with the mentor. A mentee freely discusses mistakes and is open to correction, like we talked about previously. And a mentee will invest his or her time to be in the presence of the mentor. You know, literally to this day, if our mentors in whatever area of our life, if they have an event or they're putting something on, we will change our calendar to match it up with theirs, because we realize that, you know, that's what we want. That's what we want duplicated. That's the seed that we want to plant, that seed of honor for everything that they've poured into us. We want to show that respect and show that honor to them because they've given more to us than we can ever repay to them. The way that we repay them is by passing on that mentorship. And which leads me into my next slide, passing on the mentorship to the next generation. Mentoring those, you know, it's best to mentor those who are willing to listen and apply. You know, it gives you a feeling of accomplishment and significance, a legacy, true success, and really empowering that next generation. And I do want to give these are examples of two different couples that my husband and I have mentored, and just like a snapshot of their success. You know, those who listen and apply typically make the best mentees. And so these are two personal examples. The couple to the left, they're Mike and Lauren, and Mike and Lauren actually reside up in the greater DC area. They're in their late 20s, and Mike is a JMU alum. Lauren, she went to George Mason. By day, Mike is an economist for the federal government. He graduated with econ and quantitative finance from JMU, so he's a smart dude. And Lauren, his wife, equally as smart, and she works in the hospital administration field up there out of the Alexandria area. And, you know, through mentorship, some of the things that they've been able to do, which this was super fun because they took a video of it, Lauren had a lot of student loan debt coming out of George Mason. And her first job out of college paid in the low, it didn't pay a lot, we'll just put it that way. She could she had to make like super low payments on her student loans that literally, I don't know how many years it would have taken her, but you know, she probably would have been like sending her kids to college and still just paying off her student loan debt. And so one of the cool things that they've been able to do is through some financial mentorship is they were able to pay off the remainder of her student loans in one lump sum, which was awesome. And so they no longer have that debt. They're now totally debt-free, and they have created a six-figure ongoing income outside of what they make as employees. And so that is so rewarding. And you know what we see is we see them making a big dent in the greater DC area by passing along some of that mentorship. Another example is local and close to home here. Brent and Michelle, they actually reside in the Harrisonburg area. They're in their mid-20s and a little bit different background. Brent doesn't have any formal college education. He took a semester of college and said, this isn't for me, and is like a community college dropout. And then Michelle, she went to dental hygiene school. Her dad is an oral surgeon, so he has a lot of formal education. But one thing she said is, she said, you know, I saw my dad who had a lot of formal education, who made a very good salary, but he also had very high expenses. And so she wound up taking a little bit different of a route. She did a 2-year dental hygiene program, and today, by day, Brent is in radio advertising, and Michelle is a dental hygienist. And they were able to, they are right now completely debt-free outside of the mortgage of a new home that they purchased, but they were basically able to save over 6 figures of income so they could put a substantial down payment onto a house that they, and be able to furnish that house and pay off all outstanding debts. And they too today have a 6-figure ongoing income outside of their employment. And that is so awesome, because I do know that money can be such a stressor. And that's not the only area, obviously, that you want to have mentorship in, but I believe if you can get some of that financial pressure right, then you can start working on those other areas of your life. And so, and really to close out here, this was just a personal testimony from that last couple, Brent and Michelle. That's the new house that they bought, which, you know, my husband and I are super excited for them. And I'm going to kind of wrap up with their story, and then I think we're going to open up to questions. But this is just a little bit of their story. You know, when we started, my husband and I, we were introduced to Brent before he was married. He was actually a busboy at Outback Steakhouse, and he was a young guy, and we really got to know him based upon a mutual referral. And, you know, we kind of developed a friendship with him, and then more of a mentorship style relationship. And here's just a little bit of their testimony. He said, 10 years ago, I was offered an opportunity to develop an asset that would produce a debt-free lifestyle. I'm so thankful I chose to act on it. Michelle and I are not special, but we have access to a very special mentorship system that has revolutionized our lives and our finances. We learned that self-counsel will keep you average, and if you want to get ahead, you have to find someone in life who is where you want to be. We are so thankful for the mentors in our life who have been absolutely vital in our success. Thank you, Dirk and Laura Taylor, for taking the foundational principles that we learned from our parents and enhancing them with wealth mentality. You have taught us to delay gratification, live below our means, and not to try to save our way to wealth, but create an asset that creates wealth. At the ages of 28 and 25, we're completely debt-free outside our mortgage, we own our vehicles, and we just purchased and furnished our first home. An active 6-figure income and a passive 6-figure income. God has blessed us with so much, and that's why we'll continue to be a blessing to all of those people who have and who will entrust us to help them achieve their dreams and goals. Thank you again, Dirk and Laura, for everything you have done. And, you know, I just want to wrap up with this. That's what I believe mentorship is. It's about receiving it, but then passing it on. It's not stopping with you. It's what you have learned and finding those individuals who are willing to listen and paying it forward and keeping that flow going. So we can make a ripple effect through generations to come. And so, again, before you become a good mentor, you have to first be a good mentee. And so I thank you for your time. I know it's your most valuable asset, so I don't take it lightly. And I hope I've been able to pass along something today that will help you in some area of your life. So thank you so much. And again, thank you, JMU Alum Association, and thank you, Emma.
Thank you so much, Laura. What an incredible presentation. I know I definitely got a lot out of it, and I'm sure all of our listeners have as well. You know, and really dissecting both sides of that relationship and what it really takes to be an impactful mentor, but also a grateful mentee. Some questions coming in. So, you know, when we talk about mentorships, this has been really helpful in understanding, you know, what it takes to really fulfill each of those roles. Could you give your advice on, you know, how does somebody go about actually, you know, making that ask? I've heard it a few different ways, you know, but let's say you're seeking a mentor and, you know, you found somebody in your life. How would you recommend making that connection and beginning that relationship?
It's a really great question. And again, I believe it starts with jumping outside of your comfort zone. So, let's say there's somebody at work and maybe they're a little bit ahead of you in work and you admire them and you respect them. You know, it's getting outside of your comfort zone and approaching them. I always believe in person is better. When you can look somebody eyeball to eyeball, that's best. And so that would be, you know, I believe the very best way to do it is, and to go up to them and just say, hey, I really, you know, I would start with a compliment, that sincere compliment. You know, I really respect what you've done here professionally. I can tell that you have a lot of areas of success, and I was wondering if you would be willing for me to buy you a cup of coffee or take you to lunch and run a couple questions by you. You know, I believe, you know, the journey of 100 miles starts with a single step. So taking that first single step and just simply asking the question, if you can get a bit of their time, and then come prepared. If they're willing to sit down for coffee or sit down for lunch, come prepared with some questions and be willing to listen. And remember, you know, I think a good lesson for a mentee is you have 2 ears and you have 1 mouth. So listen twice as much as you speak. So if there's someone in your presence that you want that wisdom from, ask a question, but then give them the abundance of time to answer and to pour into you.
Absolutely. No, that's really, really important. I think we could all use that advice. That's great. So also, you know, you talked about emotions. You talked about, you know, being a good mentor is, you know, being honest with your mentee, and then being a good mentee means, you know, accepting that advice, even if it's difficult. But as you know, humans do have emotions. So I guess if you could answer both sides of this, if you're a mentor and need to deliver, you know, some difficult feedback, what is some advice or strategy do you recommend? And then on the flip side, as a mentee, if you're receiving that more difficult advice, what is your strategy for accepting that gratefully and using it constructively?
Okay, that's a really good question as well. One of the most effective forms of communication in terms of communicating something that might not be so positive, like that correction from being the mentor, is sandwiching. And so basically what I would consider the sandwiching technique is just what it sounds like, is, you know, let the bread be positive and let the meat be the correction. So start with something positive. Start with, you know, something that mentee does really well. You know, hey, Sarah, you know, I want to let you know I've seen so much growth in this area. Your soft skills have really improved, this and that. Start with something positive. And then in the middle, that's where I think put that correction, and then again, end with something positive. So that way it just doesn't seem like you're kind of slamming that person. So it's, you know, it's that nice balance, it's that nice mixture. That would be my suggestion. And then in terms of as the mentee, maybe the one accepting the correction, you know, I would be open and not, again, maybe be able to receive it and then think on it for a little bit and understand that we all have areas that we need to grow in. And it is, and I guarantee you, if you think back to times in your life when you were most uncomfortable, those are the times where you've grown the most. And so to keep that perspective, that when those times, you know, things that made you a little bit uncomfortable, or somebody that maybe rubbed you the wrong way, I always think of other people that, you know, rub me the wrong way. They're like sandpaper to me, and they're just smoothing out my rough edges. And so, you know, understand that correction will make you better, and especially when it's with somebody that you trust. It's okay to feel a bit emotional about it, but then let those emotions go through you, and then really think to apply that correction.
Absolutely. I really like the sandwich concept from the mentor perspective. I think that's a really effective strategy to use. We have 2 more questions that I hope we can get through.
Okay.
First, in a mentorship relationship, as you know, there's that pretty well-known quote of people come in and out of your lives, and maybe they aren't there for the full duration of your life, but they're there for a certain time frame and for a purpose. So with that in mind, the same can be said about mentorship relationships. And so from, again, either side as the mentor or mentee, when you kind of notice that, you know, the relationship has kind of run its course, how do you, if the other side of that may not see that as well, how do you have that conversation?
So in either the mentor or the mentee side?
Correct, yes.
So, yeah, I mean, and you're right. I very much I'll reiterate what you said. You know, I believe people are brought into your life for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. That's what I've heard, and I do believe that to be right. And so sometimes, you know, if you feel like maybe that relationship isn't really producing fruit and isn't really productive, because I've seen that too, where there have been people that I've had maybe I've been the mentor and they've been the mentee, and there comes a time where they put themselves more in that friend zone. Sometimes it's not even a blatant, you know, I've got to tell them I'm not mentoring you anymore. It's I just basically stop and am more a friend to them than I am that mentor. And I think sometimes it's somebody's subconscious way of saying that they're not willing to change any more than where they're currently at. And so that's often been, I've actually never really had the experience where there's just, hey, we're just cutting off this relationship. It's been more of a slow fade. And, you know, I think just in all things, one thing I have learned is even, let's say that relationship does cut off, and it cuts off in maybe not the most positive way, is there's always something to be thankful for. So maybe if things end on a sour note, is think about the positives that you've gained from that relationship. Think about the positives that you've learned from that relationship. Think about, you know, things that maybe you could change and do differently in your future mentor or mentee relationships.
Yes, I completely agree with that we can always pick up those positives. And, you know, you mentioned the thankful thing. Well, it's the perfect season for that as well. And so then finally, a question just about that relationship and what that can look like. How does one balance, you know, having some structure in a mentorship relationship, really, you know, honing in on that advice and helping the person out, but also making sure that it feels organic, you know, that you're not just sitting down doing worksheets together, but you know, it's a fine balance there. How do you recommend finding the balance between structure and organic connection?
Well, I think when you do find the right mentor, that connection, I mean, like any relationship, it takes work and it takes effort and it takes attention and it takes pursuit. And so honoring that relationship, especially if you're in the mentee side of things, and, you know, like I said, I do believe it's your job to pursue that mentor as much as they're willing to give, and let it be in natural sort of settings. And I believe the most organic growth comes out of, you know, revealing your hearts to each other and out of a place of honesty and vulnerability. You know, when there's walls up, I think that's probably when it can seem not organic and it seems a bit forced, because there's that lack of trust. But where there's that openness of communication, and again, that openness of correction, and that let's put our walls down and allow each other to be open and honest with one another, that's where really that organic connection and that organic relationship and growth can start to take root.
That's perfect advice. You know, thank you again so much for sharing with us your information. Yep, and your information is right there for people to be able to reach out to you. and connect with you, hear maybe more about, your entrepreneurship and your journey in that way. So as you can see there, Laura's provided her information if you want to reach out to her further. On behalf of the JMU Alumni Association, I want to thank our presenter, Laura, and all of your attendees for being on the call today. Please take a moment to complete the survey that you'll receive when you exit this webinar. Your feedback helps us to continue to provide tailored programming like this for you, our alumni. And I do hope that you all will join us for our next webinar, which will be Thursday, December 15th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, featuring alumna Nicole Martrana on how JMU has continued to influence her personal and professional journey in being the change in this world. And if you or someone you know is interested in presenting, you can contact me, Emma Maynard, at maynardef@jmu.edu. And I just want to thank everyone again, and I hope everyone has a wonderful afternoon.
Thank you, Emma.